Good afternoon and welcome to chapter 6 of this set of classes for the myth, which is based on the concept of le passé dans le présent. And I've been going through different forms of signs of the past and the present. But quite quickly, and so I wanted to pause a little bit in here and give you something a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more profound. And this is a particular example then of the past and the present. Now, those of you who are in my seminar on the historiography of the First World War will be looking at that particular war and we'll be looking at commemoration and so on. But here is another example. This is James Cook. James Cook then, who it's exactly 250 years since James Cook went on his 3 expeditions where he was the first Westerner to go all the way around New Zealand. He was the first Westerner to land on the eastern coast of Australia, and also the first Westerner to arrive in a whole series of places. When I was at school, they used to say he was the man who discovered Australia. This is vocabulary that we use less these days. And because it's the 250th anniversary, of course, large numbers of people are deciding to organize commemorative events, but it's also, as these things often are, tremendously political. That is that on the one hand, James Cook is a national hero and has been for a long time in Australia and to a lesser extent in New Zealand, because he symbolized then the beginning of the Australian state as it is today. James Cook did not found the Australian state, but his job was to go around the world scouting for the British Empire, looking at what could be useful, both in goods and in lands, without any particular specific plan for any given one. However, his maps and his charting and his descriptions gave the British Empire an idea when the British were looking a little bit later for a prison colony. The French, of course, had New Caledonia. Then they decided that just around about Sydney would be just about the right place. And so, although Cook was dead by now, Cook was no longer around, then the first fleet came across and founded a penal colony. And that's where the modern Australian state came from. Now, when the modern Australians, the modern white Australians, were looking for history, looking for founding fathers, looking for a national myth, well, perhaps the first prison governors of the Sydney convict colonies were not the most romantic place to look, and certainly the tremendous adventurer Captain Cook himself was a much more romantic figure, and so James Cook became this kind of hero. But at the same time, of course, for the Aboriginals, who had a very bad time and still are having a pretty bad time, and certainly long history of racist discrimination inside Australia against Aboriginals, with the worst perhaps being it's almost difficult to rank horrible things which happen to people, but perhaps the worst being the stolen generation, which I mentioned in a previous class. Yes, for the Aboriginals, James Cook was not at all a symbol of wonderful humanity, but a symbol of the beginning of something of a terrible time, and indeed a large number of massacres and so on and so forth. So today what I want to look at is some museum exhibitions which have recently dealt with the experience of James Cook and see how they tried to implicate Aboriginal culture and put forward the idea that perhaps it is possible today to have a shared history, one that is not white and colonial, but which is shared. So some people think that is possible. And on the other hand, I want to look at another view of this, a theory of these exhibitions and indeed commemoration of James Cook in general as the performance of privilege. Okay. So I want to begin with putting my glasses on. I want to begin with then a couple of examples of commemorations causing controversy and leading to attempts to compensate in the interest of a claimed shared history. This is not a new phenomenon. I have two British examples here. First of all, this is the Shot at Dawn Memorial, the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire in the United Kingdom. It commemorates the 309 British Army and Commonwealth soldiers executed by their own army, then by court-martial, usually for cowardice, desertion, and so on, including, and so the idea here in presenting in a national military context, this statue is to try, as they were being pardoned, because they were pardoned when they executed in Britain, they were pardoned. So this monument then is an attempt to include those people who at the time had been considered as the enemy within, and this is an attempt to include them in a shared history of the First World War. So that's one example then of war of memory being used to try to have a wider base for history, including people who didn't used to be included. The second example here, this is in the University Church of St Mary the Virgin in Oxford, and it commemorates martyrs from the Reformation. Now, plaques commemorating martyrs from the Reformation are not unusual in Britain. I was brought up a Catholic, and so we were told very frequently at school about the brave Catholics who had died under Elizabeth for their faith. And similarly, in Protestant schools, they were told about how the brave martyrs had died under Mary for their faith. But this is a very unusual plaque, because this plaque actually commemorates martyrs, Catholic and Protestant, executed by the other side between 1530 and 1680 in Oxford. And so here we have an attempt then, and it also says those whose names are known stand for all who suffered. It's an attempt to, as a joint recognition of the suffering of Catholics and Protestants in the Reformation. As you can see from the fact that this plaque was unveiled in 2008, the move towards an idea of shared history can take some time. Now, these two examples are for context. They're not really comparable to our subject today, both because the painful history of colonization and racism in the Pacific is more present today than are the pasts referred to in these two cases, and also because of the immense current of thought and practice, in particular in New Zealand and in Australia, which aims now at rethinking or contesting the colonial legacy in the Pacific and considering possibilities for restorative justice on both symbolic and material levels. The second element of context that I'd like to begin with is the weight of the tsunami of hagiography of James Cook, or as we were always told, Captain Cook, which has been built up over the last 250 years. In Australia in particular, Cook remains a key part of national foundational mythology, preferable as a founding father come free spirit to the prison colony governors of the 19th century. In Britain and elsewhere in Europe, Cook has been lauded as the Enlightenment adventurer and bringer of civilization, but also as being that most modern of heroes, the disruptive entrepreneur. Coming from a modest background, changing the world and dying in harness, Cook has been a perfect storytale figure, available to public consciousness in many different ways, as I will show in a moment. So whereas the imperial heroes like Kitchener or Clive might today, or even a couple of decades ago, become more and more difficult to celebrate, as their best known works were Battles and Massacres, because Captain Cook was an explorer and not first and foremost involved in military repression of local peoples, although he did a little bit of that. It is perhaps a perfect hero that when you look at the past and you want to bring it into the present, you choose your heroes and heroines carefully. You don't just take any old one, you choose them very, very carefully. And now, as I was saying, Captain Cook is available to public consciousness, usually in hero form, in many, many different ways. You can see his statue in Sydney, in the Central Park in Sydney, so a very prestigious position. There he is, James Cook in Sydney, in the park. You can see statues of him also in Whitby, where he was born. Or was he actually born there, or did he just go to school there? I can't remember. Or in London, or you can, if you go to Canberra, you can see his fountain, the memorial fountain. Interesting that it should be a fountain rather than yet another statue. You can see his face on banknotes, or on postage stamps, or on coins, including commemorative coins, or on cigarettes, cards. You used to have cigarette cards. You collect them by smoking as much as possible and collecting the cards. It was the good old days. Or on on boxes of matches, or even on Pokemon cards. There you can see the Pokemon card of James Cook, who's defined as somebody who discovered Hawaii, and also as the worst dad ever, because he was just always away, and most of his children were born when he was away and died before he got back, which, you know, is not the modern ideal of paternity. You can see him as well, hundreds of things named after him. He gave his name to restaurants and universities. If you like the actual objects, you can see his cottage preserved in Melbourne. This was a cottage brought brick by brick over from Yorkshire to Melbourne so that people could visit and see. This is the cottage where Captain Cook actually lived. He may not have lived there actually, but let's not get too worked up with that. Or if you go to Canberra, you can see his desk. This is actually James Cook's desk in a museum in Canberra. So the magic of Captain Cook is everywhere. You can see the paintings of him. Zoffin's painting of 1795 there. You can see that's him being killed nobly. And here is Backler's painting of 1860, where you can see that he has his hand on the world. He's controlling the world in the name of the British Empire. He's domesticating. His name is also on ships. This is just last year in Sydney. Or indeed, the names of his ships have been glorified so much that they were given to the space shuttles. Here you have the space shuttle on the left. You will have recognized it, Discovery, and on the right, Endeavour. These are the names of Captain Cook's ships, which were given to the space shuttles. You can see that we're talking about a major Western hero, not just in Australia, but elsewhere too. You could also see his story in models and in board games, and even in songs. And I may be able to give you an extract from a song if I manage to work out how this will actually work. Yes, I think I can do this. Partager l'écran, Australia for Kids. I'm hoping he's going to sing to us in just a moment. Okay, there you go. I'll just see if I can get myself back here. Yes, there I am. And so if I come back to my PowerPoint, I'm not really quite an expert in this. Where's it gone? My PowerPoint, there it is. Right, just let me get back to where I was, and then we will be able to. So I think this is, yes. All of these representations then of Cook are in the background, and the visitor, the journalist, or the curator is vaguely conscious of this tradition of the glorification of Cook when they walk into or create the museum exhibitions. And for today, I decided to look at 3 museum exhibitions. So the museum exhibitions are for the 250th anniversary of Cook's expeditions. And so they're really bringing the past into the present in a way that today's audience wants to see. And as we will see, today's audience is not as interested as a few decades ago in seeing a wonderful, glorious story about superior white men going to take over the natives and teach them civilization. Fortunately, this story doesn't go down as well anymore. Nevertheless, what is the new story? So here are the 3 exhibitions I'm going to look at. The first one in the British Library in London in 2018. It cost £14 to get in. There was a 224-page catalogue. And this was James Cook, The Voyages. So very, very simple there. Perhaps perhaps you noticed that the word voyages is used where I was using the word expedition. Expedition in general, a military word. He was a military man. Voyages is a kind of romantic, adventurous word. So one might think that immediately in the title of the exhibition, you've got a certain glorification going on. The second one, also in Britain, reimagining Captain Cook, Pacific Perspectives. November 1918 to August 2019, considerably smaller. The catalogue only has 64 pages. Free entrance, though, which makes a big difference, of course, when you get a huge number of visitors. And here in the title, Reimagining Captain Cook, we've already got the message. We're not going to see him in the traditional way. It's marked in the title. And then the final one, which I wasn't able to get there, but I managed to get the catalogue. I arrived in Australia just too late. Also free entrance, an 182-page catalogue, so an enormous exhibition for a free exhibition. And the title, Cook and the Pacific. Okay, so they've got very, very neutral title there. Now, all 3 of these exhibitions attempted to include perspectives and voices from Indigenous peoples. This is something new. 50 years ago, it was not necessary. In Australia, this attempt was openly announced as a perspective or hope of shared history between white populations and Indigenous Aboriginal populations. In London, it was announced as a move away from a colonialist national narrative and as a recognition of physical and symbolic injustice from the past. So let's start with the first one. Here we go, the James Cook, The Voyages. You can see the picture there. Now, at first sight, this exhibition appeared to be a very classical presentation of Cook's travel, a chronological approach. The first expedition, New Zealand and so on. The second expedition, trying to find the southern continent that people thought existed, not Australia, a much bigger one, which doesn't exist. Don't go looking for it, it's too late, but that's what they were looking for. And the third expedition, where he was going north, right to the north of North America, and where he was finally killed in the process. In the catalogue of this exhibition, however, you immediately see some of the priorities. That is to say, that Fox's well-known heroic painting, The Landing of Captain Cook in Botany Bay, is opposite the first page of the introduction of the catalogue, and the first paragraphs of the catalogue do not talk about First Nations. The impression, however, rapidly gains nuance because as early as the second page of the catalogue, we have an illustration which is Daniel Boyd's straightforwardly oppositional anti-colonialist rendering of Fox's paintings, where you simply get a reproduction, more or less, of Fox's paintings. However, James Cook is dressed as a pirate with a patch, and the British flag has the skull and crossbones. A very simple message saying that far from being a hero, Cook was a pirate who stole somebody else's country. Inside this first exhibition, the biography of Cook, Banks, and so on remain arguably hagiographic, certainly traditional, and the ethnographic tales of First Nations also remain generally traditional, even if the peoples are names. And certainly for dozens of pages, there appears to be little or no Indigenous voices present or quoted. Nevertheless, the account of the first encounter in New Zealand includes the information, and I quote, "It is believed that the dead man was Te Maro, a chief of the Ngati Onione." And this is the sort of information which might easily have been admitted 50 years earlier, when the fact that the first thing which happened when Captain Cook came to, is he already Captain Cook? No, James Cook came to New Zealand, is that one of the local chiefs was killed, was shot dead. This is something which in the past had been, well, you know, people die sometimes. It was really brushed under the carpet, whereas today, of course, it's quite important. The catalogue does not follow the traditional story in every point, the glorious story in every point. For example, the taking possession ceremonies, well, because at a number of times during his expeditions, Cook planted a flag and said, "In the name of His Majesty, I take possession of this land," which is a ritual which certainly today we do not recognize as being in keeping with international law. So in the catalogue of this first exhibition, there is some criticism that taking possession ceremonies are presented as being of doubtful validity, and there are also in the catalogue summaries of Maori oral history accounts of Cook's visits, and in particular one by a gentleman called Te Horiat, who saw the visit as a child and recounted it as a very old man in 1852. In the section of the catalogue recounting the second journey, space is given to the stories of named First Nation peoples. So named people, not just a native came, but that's actually the names of them. For example, this person, Hiti Hiti, this is an engraving, but the original drawing was done by William Hodges, because the Cook expeditions went around with artists on board, because of course there no photography available. So, for example, the story of the Tahitian chief Tu is mentioned in the catalogue, and also the one of Hiti Hiti, a navigator and memorizer of oral cartography, who traveled on Cook's ship for a while. In fact, sometimes local peoples would ask to hitch a ride on the ship for to go to the next island or to a further island. Of course, it was something that would be quite wonderful for them. In short, then, in this first exhibition, we do see First Nation voices included, and the exhibition ends with a series of video interviews demonstrating contrasting and even contradictory opinions on Cook's legacy. So you have different people's opinion on how, well, Cook's legacy is this, and some people are being positive about it, and some people are being negative and looking at the legacy, what the arrival of Cook ended up bringing to the Aboriginal peoples. Let's go on to the second exhibition then in the British Museum. This is the free one, Pacific Perspectives. The fact that it's free is very important, of course, because that means that politically it's much more important. You get a different audience, but you get a much larger audience. And so it has a real presence there. Now, at the start of the exhibition, the display of posters from previous London exhibitions underlines its intention to be different. Here we have previous one, Captain Cook's first voyage around the world, Captain Cook in the South Seas, a much more traditional colonial gaze. However, it has to be said that in this exhibition, the colonial gaze from the previous exhibitions is not analysed or deconstructed. It is simply presented as an unfortunate ghost from the past. The museum presents interesting objects that Cook and his crew collected. But in order to introduce an indigenous voice, an Aboriginal voice, it also includes a dozen examples of contemporary art, not from today, by Aboriginal artists or Maori artists concerning Cook. And the historical articles in the exhibition include two of Tupaya's drawings. Tupaya is one of the local peoples who traveled thousands of miles with Cook and explained many things about the lore of his people and how they drew how they memorized maps. And so on and so forth, and also was very, very useful as an interpreter, because the language of, let's get this right, the language of New Zealand was sufficiently similar to the language of Tupaya's land. Now, so we see there's a real attempt to have a significant percentage of indigenous voices in this exhibitions, and furthermore, a number of these artistic productions by Aboriginal artists were not just borrowed for the duration of the exhibition, but which were bought by the British Museum to add to their collection. So it's clearly a signal of them being taken seriously. I only really have time to look at one. This is by Maori artist Steve Gibbs. First of all, you can see Cook's ship being shown upside down, a fairly clear contestation of the hero worship often attached to the gentleman, and also this idea, of course, the very Northern European idea that somehow that's down under, which of course for the Aboriginal peoples this was not the case. And secondly, it takes up the question of the classic colonial practice of renaming of places by Cook. So Cook, he arrives, he says, oh yes, I'm going to name this bay Botany Bay and this region New South Wales. And this is something which can be experienced as very violent. I mean, if I came to your house and said, oh, I know, I'll call that cat Zoe. And you'd say, what do you mean it's my cat? How can you be naming my cat? And certainly this is even more the case with the places named by Cook. In particular, Cook arrived at this particular place and he decided to call it Poverty Bay because he didn't get what he wanted in it. And many Aboriginals object to such a name being applied to their home. And in this artwork, the local names of the place in indigenous languages are commemorated in the center of the picture. Nevertheless, today, in Australia, the bay is still called Poverty Bay, although the bay was officially given the dual name Turungama Akiwa Poverty Bay in 2019. So you can see the past is very, very much present. Now, this second exhibition, then, Pacific Perspectives, was well received in many reviews, and the attempt to include Indigenous expression was welcomed. Nevertheless, some critics considered superficial the inclusion of these voices and also pointed out the contradiction which might be apparent in connection with the British Museum's wider resistance to the return of Indigenous artifacts, in particular those whose acquisition is considered to be illegitimate. So to give you an example, in the center point of the exhibition was the chief mourner's costume from Tahiti. This is a special costume used in mourning ceremonies. And when they were preparing it for the exhibition, they were able to take it apart and found that it is tremendously complex, and every part of it has a symbolic meaning. So fabulous thing. But the interesting thing about this, the fact that they used this one, is that this was something which was acquired in a relatively legitimate manner. That is to say that the first time that that Cook was in this in Tahiti, this is from Tahiti, the first time Cook was in Tahiti, he really wanted one of these costumes. But the local said, oh, no, we're not giving you a costume. It's too valuable, we're not giving you a costume. And only the second time, when he was able to bring this is like the following year, when he was able to bring objects which the locals really wanted, was he able to exchange it? So this particular costume was acquired in a relatively legitimate manner, and this is explained in detail how they got the costume of the chief mourner. And you get the feeling that the British Museum is like justifying themselves. Oh, look how legitimate this collection was. Which is all very well, of course. So, however, the general context, of course, is that the British Museum is being asked to return a whole number of objects which were less legitimately acquired. And the British Museum has been very much involved in this controversy, as can be seen by this article in 2019. Sorry, 2016 here. Now, this is the Gweagal Shield, which was taken, I think, from New Zealand. No, in Botany Bay during a violent encounter that it was stolen. Now, this shield is part of the British Museum's collection, and it's an extremely important object, which was part of the, the 100 best objects in the British Museum or something. And yet they did not put this in the exhibition. And it may well be because they didn't want to have in this particular exhibition controversial objects which had obviously been stolen. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean they're going to give it back. Here you can see the article from 2016, when Indigenous Australians came to London and wanted to discuss the possibility of having it bringing back. And therefore, despite the fact that this second exhibition includes Indigenous voices, there's still very much hesitation or breaking on the part of the British Museum when it comes to the wider question of restorative symbolic justice. Finally, then the third exhibition, Cook in the Pacific, in Canberra, in the capital of Australia, the National Library of Australia, in 2018 to 19. Now, the political context in Australia is naturally somewhat different. Captain Cook, had been at one point practically a national religion. At the bicentenary 50 years ago, for the 200th anniversary, newspapers had traced day by day where Cook had been exactly 200 years previously. And indeed, for the 200th anniversary, Queen Elizabeth gave a celebratory tour of Australia, spending more than 40 days in Australia. And many towns organised a reenactment of Cook's arrival with bit parts for real Aboriginals. And large numbers of towns held pageants of progress on the 200th anniversary. And here is the replica of Cook's sword, produced and sold to celebrate the bicentenary of his first visit to Australia. So our impression then is that in 1969, for the 200th anniversary, the celebration was completely unapologetic. Glorious Cook, unapologetic, what's the problem? And the tone of the exhibitions today is a measure of how much change there has been. The Liberal Premier of New South Wales declared in 1969, Cook's discovery tilled the ground for the seeds of settlement. From these seeds come a great and free nation, predominantly British. Now, today's exhibition, I'm not quite sure what my slides are doing here. Today's exhibition is different in tone, and certainly is a huge amount of tension. There is a ministerial foreword to the catalogue, but the first long essay in the catalogue is by John Maynard, director of an Indigenous Research Studies Centre, and its title shows a determination not to understate its opposition to any Cook hagiography. The essay is entitled "I'm Captain Cooked." Now, let's say that "cooked" rhymes with a rather rude word in English, and the message is very, very clear. The essay begins in the catalogue of this third exhibition in Canberra. In raising the British flag on Possession Island in the Torres Straits, Cook unleashed cataclysmic consequences upon Aboriginal people of the Australian continent. And he goes on to speak of the negative representation of Cook in traditional Aboriginal songs. And it's only at this point, once in the first essay, the Aboriginal position has been explained, that you are allowed to go forward. Furthermore, the exhibition begins with a welcome to country, which is the traditional Aboriginal welcome to people. So we see in this last exhibition then an even stronger desire to move away from a purely colonial gaze, a desire shaped by the long struggle for Aboriginal visibility and rights over the last 50 years and more. An Australian journalist pointed out recently, whenever our Prime Minister makes an announcement of any event to mark the 250th anniversary of Captain Cook's voyages, there are two reactions, and both are angry. One is dismayed that this harbinger of colonialism should be celebrated at all, and the other is that we are failing to properly appreciate this master navigator and scientist. And even this exhibition, then this exhibition was despite its attempt to really bring in Aboriginal voices, it remained very much controversial. By accident, I have quite a number of left-wing friends in Canberra. And when I asked them if any of them had been to see the exhibition, they looked at me as if I had insulted them. It was out of the question for left-wing supporters of Aboriginal rights to go to this. So if there is no reason to doubt the determination of a significant section of museum leaderships to move away from a purely colonial view of Cook's activity, we have much reason to believe that this change of perspective is not as easy to implement or as thoroughgoing as some optimistic commentators might want to think. Finally, one might wonder whether the exhibition of another exhibition, I just wanted to end by saying it would be interesting to see what kind of exhibitions museums will feel appropriate for the 300th anniversary of Cook's expeditions. Thank you for listening. That was a little longer than the other ones, but that's the end of chapter 6.